in the early days of my startup, there was a point where our first iteration of our app went super viral. And because we built it that way, because it was designed in a Jamstacky way where it was static first and everything, it didn't break a sweat. There was no servers going down. There was no one like DDoSing the server or anything like that. It just worked.
This is What the Jam, an interview series where we're finding out what's next for Jamstack. Find out more at thefutureofjamstack.org.
All right, I'm excited to have Cassidy Williams here today. So Cassidy is a speaker on all things Jamstack. She writes, she streams about it, and is a keyboard connoisseur, would you call it?
Nerd, obsession.
Nice. Well, excited to have you here today. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So let's start off with the biggest question. What does Jamstack mean to you?
What a wonderful question. I think of Jamstack as anything that doesn't require me to do backend development, where for better or for worse, where I really like not having to like handle the load balancing and all the things of setting up a backend and database thing. I like being able to work with serverless as needed, build as many things as I can on the front end side and kind of live in there and being able to build quote unquote full stack apps while being in my comfort zone, where my comfort zone is mostly the front end world. And to take it one step further, I see it as treating the browser as an operating system, where like if you build an app for iOS, for Android, for any of these native platforms, a lot of things are very like native and quote unquote static and live on the phone itself. And then you kind of pull in data as needed. And I feel like that's what Jamstack is, but in the browser, where everything is kind of built up front as much as possible. And then stuff is pulled in as needed.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy. Yeah, it's interesting that, man, you're really triggering some memories here. Like the original iPhone, I think the App Store was going to be HTML5.
I think it was.
HTML and like web apps, and you could kind of pull anything in there, and quickly like moved away from that. I think when they realized, one, like the monetization, and two, native apps.
Which could have been.
Yeah. But it's interesting that mobile apps like realize, well, I guess Apple realized that and kind of built out the Jamstack version for mobile.
Right.
Yeah, before the web.
Yeah. And I feel like that's the mindset that works best for me. And that's kind of just how I build personally, where we're on all of my apps and things. I try to do as much just at once at build time as possible. And client-side apps are great. I still write the occasional single page application. But treating the browser the way it is as this operating system, and it has enough powerful APIs now that you can do that.
So how did you get into this world? What's that path look like for you?
Well, I will say I worked at Netlify, so that's a big part of it. But I've been doing web development for a very long time. For oh gosh, I think we're gonna hit the 20-year mark this year. So I've been doing it for a very long time. But I remember a few years ago I joined Netlify back in 2020, pre-COVID times or around COVID times, and when I was talking with them about Jamstack and about the term, I remember I was asking all these questions like, is it capital JAM or do we just do the word Jamstack? Also, it seems like it's just web development. Am I missing something? And I wasn't. It's just web development. I think it's gotten to the point where the term both means something and doesn't mean something. And it like tried to cover too much, and then all of a sudden it wasn't covering enough. And the pendulum swings like to server-side rendering and not server-side rendering. And I feel like we're in that swing right now. But that's how I've gotten involved with it, where the term, I started to drink the Kool-Aid more on it in 2020, but the style of web development I've been doing for a long time.
Yeah. So you I think you came you're like a React teacher for a long time, right? And
Yeah.
was that kind of the step before getting into Jamstack, where
It was.
now you can build the
Yeah.
operating system in the browser with React?
Right. Yeah. Where I've been using React for a long time. I've been using React for almost 10 years now. And yeah, I kind of went from React and teaching React full time to where does it live in the browser and how can we really take advantage of what the browser has to offer.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting what you said before, where it's both meant too much Jamstack, the term, too broad and too narrow. I really agree with that. Like, I think it was a lot of these conversations are trying to figure out where the line is, because in the initial stages of Jamstack, it was so prescriptive, like JAM stand for JavaScript APIs and markup. So everyone's like, well, where's the limit of that? But then when we moved to a noun and the definition widened, now it's like, well, is there a line? Is it web development? Right. And it's interesting that it's like the two opposite ends of the scale almost. Yeah, like what did you see at your time at Netlify, like that sort of transition there?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because some people now say like Jamstack won, and some people are just like, no, Jamstack lost. And who knows? Because I feel like it really depends on the style of web development that you do now. And while I was at Netlify, I specifically was focusing a lot on Next.js, which was kind of facing its own branding things as they were trying to figure it out. Where I remember in the early days of Netlify, they were using the term Jamstack, the Next.js team, and they were giving talks on Jamstack and stuff, and they were embracing it and saying like, this is the static export for Next. These are the stuff that you could do. And then later in my time, and just in the past couple of years especially, they've been just like server-side rendering things and using React server components and that sort of thing. And so I don't know if it's because of opinions or because they wanted a different market share or the venture capital powers that be that changed sentiments, but it was always a weird combination of like working with and against the Next.js team as I was doing a lot of Next.js work while at Netlify, and like Netlify and Vercel were very direct competitors that were like kind of friendly but kind of not, and it was that was a fun little political dance to navigate on occasion.
Yeah, and it seems like Jamstack kind of got lost in that battle.
Yeah, it did, because a lot of people were just like, oh, it's just serverless. And I would play around with it and be just like, you could technically do server-side rendering with serverless functions, and like wrote blog posts about that. And people were just like, well, then is that even Jamstack anymore? And both yes and no, because it's still serverless. You still aren't controlling a server, but also you are calling a server a lot with a serverless function. It was... yeah, things got lost in there, and it became a very hard marketing problem.
Yeah, it is. So where would you draw that line? Because it's so hard to draw it in one place. I'm interested.
It is, and I think that line for me is like, it is still Jamstack because of the serverless thing. Once again, the definition for me really is that treat the browser like the operating system, and have everything be as native and as static on the browser as possible, and then pulling things in. I feel like that philosophy works the best in my brain, at least. I don't know if people agree with me, but for me in particular, that's where it lives, and that's where I really like using frameworks like Astro or like Eleventy or a lot of things that are kind of ship less JavaScript by default, but then pulling things in. And that's where I use something like Next.js less, because it's doing way more server things. And that's not something I want to deal with when I'm building.
Yeah. I want to throw an idea at you and just see what you think. So okay. I've been really struggling to find that line. Initially, I thought it was static, because that's like a clear cut, but it's also like pretty limited, and like that next step between static and serverless is quite interesting because it unlocks a whole lot more use cases. But then it's a slippery slope. Like, what's the next step after that? And suddenly WordPress is Jamstack. So like, I've been through these talks. I've been hearing the term static first a lot, where it's a default, and I feel like it's much nicer to wrap your head around, because it's like, well, it's not saying you can't do these things. It's just saying like consider the trade-off at each step. Serverless is great, but it's like more complex, and now you've got actual code running on servers. Dynamic's useful for other use cases, but there's a different set of trade-offs there. But if you don't need any of those things, it should be static, and that's not the way the web's built at the moment. Like, what do you think of that? You're kind of the first person I've described it like that too.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way of putting it, because a lot of it is static first, where like if JavaScript didn't work, like if you turned up JavaScript on your app, could at least some of it show up? Could it be a reasonable application? For a lot of like server rendered apps, no. For a lot of them, just nothing would show up at all.
Yeah.
For anything that is static first, you might get like the entire frame of the app and then maybe like a loading thing, but that's it. And I feel like that's okay. And that's where you could like pull in a lot of progressive web app methodologies and be like, it kind of works offline somewhat, and seeing how much can you make actually work without JavaScript needing to run, or without internet needing to run or something, and being very it's like a combination of static first and local first, and then kind of going from there, where everything else is possible, but these core things, these core primitives, for lack of a better word, exist and work.
Yeah. Did you study web development at university?
I studied computer science, so I got in like the nitty gritty of all the math.
Was web development part of that, or just?
No, I fully self-taught on the web development front.
Yeah, it's like at my university, it was there, but it was, universities are often like quite far behind the modern kind of tech. But yeah, it was really, the one thing that was drilled into us was like HTML. And I feel like that is really stuck with me in my journey.
And I think a lot of HTML, I think in earlier years in this weird pendulum swing of web dev, I feel like there was a point where HTML was kind of treated like a second-class citizen, because single-page applications were such a thing. All you need is a root div, and then you never have to touch HTML again, even though you're kind of doing it in JSX. Like that was definitely a thing, but HTML has come really far. I even just looking at the state of HTML survey in 2023, I was going through it and I was like, there's so many elements now that I didn't know existed.
Yeah.
Like the details and summary elements, for example, and like the time element for formatting time, things like that, where I didn't know they were real. And I feel like, kind of like what you said, if now I'm starting to beat the drum of HTML more, where I'm like, why aren't we using this? You use our resources in the browser and then enhance with JavaScript, rather than using JavaScript to replace everything. Because JavaScript is good, but I feel like we pushed the boundaries of it a lot rather than taking advantage of the platform, and we need to use the platform a lot more.
Yeah, it's like trying to solve these problems that JavaScript has created with more JavaScript. Just these levels and levels of complexity.
Yeah, it's like that ongoing joke that all JavaScript frameworks are just trying to be PHP.
Yeah, I can see that.
We're all just trying to solve the problems that PHP solved ages ago.
Yeah, that's it. I think you've talked about this recently with the React community. Like I'm not big in the React world, but I see it from the outside that there's just so much re-engineering that has to happen with each development, and it's exactly that, right? Trying to get closer to something like PHP.
Right. Every time they make a discussion on this, there's always someone joking saying PHP did this 5 years ago or something, which is fine. I mean, more power to them. I feel like there's a lot of potential with what they're trying. I think they're trying to when I say the React team, I think they're trying to make React more of a programming language rather than just a quote unquote JavaScript library. But I like using it as a JavaScript library. And so it'll be interesting to see the direction that goes in.
Yeah, it will. So let's get back to Jamstack. What do you, when you think of Jamstack, what do you think of as like the core benefits of why you would choose a Jamstack approach?
I see it in how pages are served to users and how there's a few different benefits. First of all, the whole concept of like atomic deploys, where like if it is deployed, this is what the page looks like for everyone, no matter what, because it's on a CDN of some kind, where like your URL is the source of truth. I feel like that's a very, very powerful guarantee that it offers, that like at first you're just like, okay, sure, it's the same for everyone. But that's a big deal, because if you have something on a CDN and let's just say Beyonce tweets out your website, you're going to get tons and tons and tons of hits. On a CDN, it's not going to break a sweat because all of the work has already been done. You're just showing what you've like printed out on the page, and you're showing that rather than having to print out a page every single time like you would with a server application. And that's something where in the early days of my startup, there was a point where our first iteration of our app went super viral. And because we built it that way, because it was designed in a Jamstacky way where it was static first and everything, it didn't break a sweat. There was no servers going down. There was no one like DDoSing the server or anything like that. It just worked. And I feel like that is the biggest benefit that you could ask for. And with the URL being a source of truth, and then you can always go to that URL and know what to expect.
Yeah.
And granted, like depending on the JavaScript on the page, that can be a hit or miss. But I feel like that type of guarantee is so useful for debugging and for like instantly rolling back a deploy or something like that to what the site should be at any given time.
Yeah, I mean it's terrifying not having that. Where you're like, I don't know exactly what's going to be here. You can't really guarantee anything.
But and I feel like that's where things like the incremental static regeneration and deferred static generation, there's so many different names like ISR, DSG, DSR, all of these things. It pushes the boundaries of that because when you hit a URL, the first user at that URL generates the page, and then it's static after that. And it's statically added to that build. I could see that breaking it, but it also works. I go back and forth on if it's Jamstacky enough or not in this fluffy term world, because it makes your build time smaller. There's benefits to it, but then is it pure Jamstack? Because it's not a purely static page at first, but then it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I've struggled with that one in particular. Like I wrote this post called "Where's the Line" on Jamstack, and I put it not in Jamstack because that first hit is dynamic,
right? And
then, but that's where like just now thinking about it more of a paradigm of trying to get more static. Then you can start talking about the trade-offs. Like, okay, well, it's going to reduce build time doing that, and I have a 1,000,000-page site, so I kind of have to do that, and I shouldn't feel guilty about that. I'm not like stepping out of, well, I'm kind of stepping out of a static world, but that's fine. It's a trade-off.
But only for a bit.
Yeah.
It's just a quick step, and then we'll be right back.
Tiptoe out.
Yeah. Well, there's that, and then you start dealing with caching. That's something that I really don't like touching. I love not touching caching, and that's one of the benefits of Jamstack in my head, not having to touch caching. But then when you get into again the ISRs, DSGs of the world, you start towing that line again.
Yeah, that's it. I was thinking about your mobile app analogy. And what if you flip that on its head? Like if mobile apps worked the way of dynamic websites, what does that look like? And I'm not sure if this works, but is it that you go to the app store, you download the source code, and then on your phone, every time you use it, it has to build the like app from source code, and then you get to use it. It's like something like that, right?
Something like that. I mean, look at the Notion app. No hate to the Notion team, but if you open it up on like a train or something and you don't have much of a signal, that's what it looks like. Things don't load or partially load or barely load, or just the whole app just freezes. I feel like it, and maybe it's been better in recent months. It was rough a little while ago where that one is very fully pulled from a server somewhere. It's not pre-built on the client in any way, shape, or form, and your users see the effects of it. And the whole reason why I don't use Notion as like my main second brain note-taking tool is because it does that. I need an internet connection to make everything work, and everything needs to be pulled and be fast. So that's what I see, and that's what I picture when everything is not in this Jamstack first way.
That makes sense. And for like a note-taking app, a train is a huge use case. It's kind of what you want to do on a train.
Yeah, it's either an audiobook or writing something, and
So let's talk about the Jamstack term itself. What do you think of Jamstack as a name? Do you think we should keep it, or do you think we should have something else?
I lean towards keeping it purely because the community is there and people generally get it enough.
Yeah.
Like it's not a perfect term, but it's ours. And it's something that I feel like if you were to say, I'm going to build a Jamstack community, you generally know who will be involved. Mm-hmm. Or if I'm going to build a Jamstack foundation, you generally know who's probably going to support it. Where it's gotten to be that common of a term that people generally know what to expect, for better or for worse. I can't really think of a better term because I don't like, for example, serverless. I hate the term serverless. It doesn't make sense. There's a service called serverless that does serverless functions. That's so confusing. And it's not that there's no server. You just don't own the server.
Yeah.
That's my thing. At least with Jamstack, like, it's not as confusing as something like that. And you get the vibe. I might be wrong, but I feel like that I'm okay with the term continuing to exist.
Yeah, the one thing I'd say there is just the baggage it has through name changes and like being an acronym and then not an acronym. Where
that's very true.
I find people are at different like points in the journey, and maybe some have like intentionally stopped. Like, no, it means this to me. So like if it is going to continue, it needs some sort of to bring everyone in on this is it.
Yeah, not my Jamstack, but yeah, it's definitely it's whatever you want it to be. I've heard that joke a lot around the term, and yeah, maybe there's a better one. I'm personally okay with it. I don't really have enough hate or opinion on the term itself to say that it should go away.
Yeah, I think you're right though. Like the community that's there, if you say Jamstack and are interested in Jamstack, they're going to engage with whatever that is. Whereas if it's a new term, now everyone doesn't know what it is, and there's a lot of education that needs to happen there. And then there's going to be a lot of questions if isn't this just Jamstack? It's kind of inevitable.
Yeah, let people continue to debate while the rest of the people are just coding and saying like, what CMS should I use? That's fine.
Yeah, I mean I think that's one of the problems with Jamstack is that we spend our time talking about the stuff, the definition.
Honestly, that's web development everywhere. Yeah. My sister's a software engineer, and so is my husband and several friends, and none of them are web devs. They're very specifically like they do back end or native development and stuff like that. And they always talk to me. They're just like, front end seems to have such drama all the time. Why does everybody argue so much? And I'm just like, you're right. We should just be coding. but we have so many opinions. Someone has to hear them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's interesting to hear. I guess with like, if you're doing backend or like iOS development, those are the tools you have, right? You got to use what's in front of you.
Yes, it is what it is. Yeah. And granted, there's always like the Go people who argue with the Rust people or something like that. Those exist, but yeah, I feel like there's a lot more personal thoughts in the web dev community.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah.
So what do you think needs to happen with Jamstack for it to remain relevant?
I feel like, honestly, I feel like it has to go into some kind of foundation or some kind of community-run organization, because I really appreciate what Netlify did to like start the term and propel it forward and support the community, but they have VCs to answer to, and they've got to figure out how they're going to IPO someday. They've got business stuff to take care of, and unfortunately, when that happens, that means community work tends to go by the wayside because they have to keep their business running, which we see all the time. Once again, I don't love it, but I can't blame them for it because that's capitalism, baby. And so I feel like some kind of community-run group foundation thing where people can interact with each other, build with each other, work in open source, and vote on what terms do mean, or on like what community efforts should exist, what meetups should happen, that sort of thing. I feel like that there's a lot of potential there. I think it could be a very, very healthy community if the stewards of said community are like really in it and care about it. And I feel like there are enough people who would be down to be involved in such a thing. It's just a matter of starting and going for it. But I do think that such a future could exist.
Yeah, agreed. What do you think happens if Jamstack goes away, if that doesn't happen?
It's going to be a lot of just plain old web development. Well, not only that, I do think that, like, again, we're in a pendulum swing right now. Yeah. And right now I feel like there are a lot of very vocal people who are just like, server's the true way. It's going to swing back. I've been around long enough to see that pendulum swing multiple times. It's gonna swing back, and it'll eventually be like, actually, SPAs are pretty good, or no, we're gonna do this multi-page application architecture. Like there's so many things. The pendulum will always be swinging back and forth. But I do think if a term such as Jamstack goes away, the community won't necessarily go away. They'll just kind of disperse into their own pockets until the next pendulum swing.
Yeah. What do you think is going to cause that next pendulum swing?
The next React. Well, I feel like it'll be the next something. There's always a new framework popping up. There's always some new thing coming up. In the past few weeks, I can't stop hearing about HTMX.
Yeah.
And there's also whispers of Alpine getting bigger again. There's so many things that will be growing and changing. And I feel like a lot of web development is actually not changing. Like a lot of concepts in Jamstack, for example, are pretty old. It's just that it's more accessible now.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff that's happening with server-side rendering, it's not old. It's just more accessible now to people. And I feel like that's constantly it, where people start switching back and forth between what their current mindset is, because it's just easier now to do that one thing that they wanted to do.
Yeah. I think accessibility is that key point, because I think there's so many levels of complexity in like a modern front-end stack now that something like HTMX comes along and it's like, oh, that's way simpler. Let's do that.
Yeah.
And then that hits problems and builds up complexity to solve all these problems. And like, I feel like it's just a complexity pendulum back and forth.
Right. It's everything's getting more complex, but also easier to access. Like everybody has been shouting about like edge functions and rendering on the edge. That was a thing a long time ago. It's just enterprises were doing it and really big organizations were doing it. Now I could do it.
Yeah.
and yeah, I think it's just different things are getting easier to access and easier to do, while at the same time becoming a lot more complex. And I both am very grateful to have learned coding so long ago, where it was really just like figuring out HTML and throwing some JavaScript at it. And now it's which library do I grab? Which framework do I do? Which host should I use? Yada, yada, yada. But at the same time, there's so many possibilities now where I wouldn't have been able to dream that I could build a really complex app as a kid because I just didn't know.
That's it. Like I tried building a very JavaScript heavy app back in like 2012 and was doing it with like jQuery and things and saving state in HTML, and it just all these horrible things and hit all the problems you expect. Like, yeah, with the like new frameworks, like there is a complete new realm of possibilities. And I guess that's the pendulum as well, is trying to, okay, we can do these things. Like, how do we do it simpler and make it more accessible to beginners? Because I imagine coming into web development now, you've got 1,000 directions you could go.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't know where to start. I mean, most people probably start with React. That's where most of the content is.
They're just like, that seems to be the thing that I'm supposed to do. Yeah. And there's pros and cons to that. And I feel like just as we are letting this pendulum swing back and forth, I've been kind of beating the drum of educating people on what everything means as much as possible, because it can't just be like a few like good-natured souls who are like, I'll teach the community, because that's way too much burden. But that's kind of what you see in a lot of circles. We need education on what things actually mean and why it's better to do it this way, and cons, pros and cons, instead of just saying this is how you build websites now. I feel like that kind of education needs to be happening up front, because otherwise it's people just kind of saying, I blindly trust you and I will build this way. And then if something breaks, how do you fix it?
Yeah.
If you don't know how it works.
Yeah. And I think understanding those fundamentals and building up as well. Like I think the first thing any beginner should learn is just HTML and CSS. Get really good at that.
Yes.
Because if you don't
start dabbling in JavaScript, then
if you don't, then you hit these problems and you're like, well, how do I solve it in this tool? You don't have that zoomed out vision of how a browser works.
Right. Yeah. There's so many resources. It's overwhelming now. Where like, in a way, I do, again, wish that I did learn later, because I'm just like, wow, there's YouTube now. I could just watch a tutorial and it'll just work. There's GPT now where I could ask don't ask GPT.
Yeah, that's a scary one.
I've tried a few times where I was like, I'll have it teach me this API. It was so bad. I lost so many hours. But again, you live and you learn. Anyway, there's so many good resources now, but figuring out who to listen to and how to do things right is significantly harder. And so, yeah, I feel like overall as a community, we could probably do a lot better on educating, and something like, to bring it full circle, something like a Jamstack community that shows people like, this is what web development is and this is how you can get started and grow. I feel like there's so much opportunity there.
Let's end it there. That's a great note to finish on.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining today, Cassidy. This was awesome chat.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm happy to do it. And then if you need anything from me, let me know.
That's it for today's interview. Find out more at thefutureofjamstack.org.